This is Nightly Business Report with Tyler Matheson and Sue Herrera.
Hitting back, three well-known CEOs of some of the world's most recognizable companies are making their frustrations with the government known. The power of parity. There are 2 trillion reasons why shrinking the gender gap could give the economy a massive boost. Shortchanged? Have you ever traded in your spare coins for cash at a counting machine? It may have cost you a lot more than you thought. All that and more tonight on Nightly Business Report for Thursday, April 7th. Good evening, everybody, and welcome. I'm Sue Herrera. Tyler Matheson is off this evening. We begin with 3 very powerful CEOs who are leading some of the world's biggest and most influential companies. Today, they let it be known that they are frustrated with the government and politicians. Pfizer's Ian Read, General Electric's Jeff Immelt, and J.P. Morgan's Jamie Dimon, in 3 separate letters, gave a vigorous defense of their companies, most of which are widely held by investors. We'll start with Pfizer. In a Wall Street Journal op-ed, Ian Read slammed the Treasury Department's new tax rules, which resulted in Pfizer walking away from its $160 billion deal with Allergan. He wrote, quote, "This ad hoc attempt to single out and damage the growth opportunities of companies operating within the current law is unprecedented, unproductive, and harmful to the U.S. economy." He said the broken U.S. tax system puts American companies like Pfizer at a competitive disadvantage. And now to General Electric. In an op-ed in today's Washington Post, Jeff Immelt took direct aim at some of the claims Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders has made against his company, including the criticism that GE is destroying the moral fabric of America. Mary Thompson has been following the story for us. Good to see you, Mary, as always.
Nice to be here.
Jeff Immelt offered a very impassioned defense of his company. What did he say?
He basically, denied everything that Sanders said. As you would expect, he talked about the company's 124-year-old history, the jobs it's created, the wealth it's created. He also talked about the businesses GE has in Sanders' home state of Vermont, and invited him to come visit it. Now, Sanders takes issue with the fact that GE has closed plants and has shipped jobs overseas. Immelt responds, listen, we built 5 plants in the U.S. in the past 5 years.
Right.
And if you do business in 180 companies, you can't have all the jobs on the home turf. That being said, Immelt has talked about moving jobs from China to lower-cost countries.
All right. He also, though, made some comments, and he has become increasingly vocal about his frustrations, if you will, with the government and the poor relationship that corporate America seems to have with the administration.
Anyone who read his annual letter would know that. He said that the relationship between corporate America and Washington, D.C. is the worst that he's ever seen during his career. He accused the government to some extent of being two-faced. He said, you know what, they love exports, but they don't like trade. They love small business. They regulate them to death. He also always points out that, when German Chancellor Angela Merkel travels, she's always with a German business leader, basically to showcase German goods. He says that would never happen here in the U.S.
Interesting. Do you think he has a point, or do you think most people and business people would think he had a point?
He certainly has supporters, but his critics would say, GE gets plenty of help from the government in the form of the Export-Import Bank,
True.
which, of course, is a financing tool for foreign companies who want to buy the goods of U.S.-based companies like GE. GE would counter, listen, other countries have similar financing tools, and this is merely a way to level the global playing field.
There's more to this story. Thank you so much, Mary. Appreciate it. Mary Thompson. All right, the CEO of J.P. Morgan now, in a letter published late yesterday, explained why the bank is not too big to fail. J.P. Morgan is the largest bank in the country by assets, but Jamie Dimon says its balance sheet is a fortress and asked shareholders to reject the call to break up Wall Street's banks, something that has become a central component of Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign. Well, one company that is no longer considered too big to fail is MetLife. The legal opinion on last week's decision to strike down that designation was unsealed today. In it, the judge described the decision by regulators to label the insurer systemically important as arbitrary and capricious. In the ruling, the judge raised questions about the process used to bring MetLife and other insurers under stricter federal rules. The Pentagon is raising concerns about the takeover bid between Canadian Pacific and Norfolk Southern. The issue rests on the voting trust Canadian Pacific has proposed as part of its bid, and said the deal could adversely affect the country's national defense. The agreement would have CP's CEO run Norfolk Southern as part of that voting trust. On Wall Street today, stocks fell as concerns about global economies resurfaced. Investors sought safety, fleeing stocks. They rushed right into government bonds as the price of oil fell and the Japanese yen strengthened. By the closing bell, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which had been down about 200 points this afternoon, lost 174 to 17,541. The Nasdaq fell 72, and the S&P 500 declined 24. And you can often find China at the center of those global growth concerns. And while the recent economic data out of the world's second largest economy has been better, those reports may not be telling the whole story. Seema Modi explains.
The 6-week bounce back by the stock market has some investors wondering what happened to the Great Wall of Fear surrounding China. All the talk of a slowdown in the world's second biggest economy and its effect on global growth. This week, some short-term economic data from China has shown improvement. Manufacturing expanded for the first time in 9 months. The Services Purchasing Managers Index rose a full point in March. Any number above 50 indicates growth. Also, Chinese industrial firms posted higher profits for January and February, and currency rates have stabilized some since last summer's downdraft. But China's change from a manufacturing to a consumer-based economy leaves some investors wondering if a turnaround is really possible.
China has the advantage that its service sector is very strong, growing double digits, and we think that'll keep that economy stable. But as long as they remain committed to consolidating the manufacturing and construction sectors, you're going to continue to see weak manufacturing data leading out of China, and that's going to drag down those same sectors in the neighboring countries.
Indeed, many of China's Asian peers, South Korea, Hong Kong, and Japan, countries that rely heavily on demand from Chinese companies, are not faring as well. South Korea posted a double-digit decline in first quarter exports. Hong Kong's manufacturing levels are at their lowest level since August, and in Japan, business confidence has been dropping.
And with every statistic we see out of Asia, ex-China, whether it's Taiwan, whether it's Hong Kong, and other Asian countries, they're suffering slowdowns from their sensitivity and exposure to China. So global growth continues to shrink, with China being a big part of that.
It's just one of several global concerns that continue to haunt stock markets in a year still full of question marks. In Europe, talks of a Brexit will hover until summer, and after that, an already hot U.S. presidential campaign will shift into high gear. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Seema Modi.
Back at home, the number of workers who applied for unemployment benefits fell last week. Jobless claims, a proxy for layoffs across the economy, dropped 9,000 to near historically low levels. If the data on the economy remains strong, the president of the Dallas Fed said he would advocate for a hike in interest rates. But Robert Kaplan declined to say when exactly he would do so, but did say that the economy is approaching a point where it would be prudent to remove some accommodation. A new McKinsey Global Institute study says the U.S. economy could grow an extra $2 trillion by 2025 if the public and private sector did more to shrink the gender gap that prevents women from reaching their full economic potential. According to the report, every state in the country could increase its GDP by at least 5% over the next decade if it narrows the gender gap at work. Quaylin Ellengrud, partner at McKinsey & Company and lead author of that study, joins us now. Welcome, Quaylin. Nice to have you here.
Thank you.
You looked at inequities or the gaps in a total of about 10 different sectors. What did you find in the United States?
Yeah. Across the United States, we found that the value of closing the full gap would be about $4 trillion. But we didn't think that closing the full gap over the next 10 years was realistic. And so instead, we looked historically at the fastest rate of improvement across the U.S. states. And if you match that fastest rate of improvement, that gets you to about half of the gap, or the $2 trillion. And as you mentioned, that is at least 5% GDP for every single U.S. state. And that's 10% GDP growth for half of the U.S. states. That's the equivalent of adding the economy of the size of the state of Texas to the United States.
You looked at 10 different indicators in the U.S., economic, social, political, in terms of the gender gap. You found that the U.S. had a high or extremely high inequality in 6 of the 10. If you had to pinpoint 1 or 2 of those inequalities that would perhaps make the biggest economic impact, which would they be?
The two that I would point to of the 6 would be leadership and management positions. So for every 100 men in leadership positions, there's only 66 women in the United States. And the second I would point to is unpaid care work. So women do on average double the amount of unpaid care work as men in the United States, but 2/3 of that unpaid care work is routine housework, cleaning, cooking, laundry, etc. And less than 20% of it is actually care of loved ones, kids or the elderly. And so reducing that unpaid care work so that women can more actively participate in the workplace would help capture the share of the $2 trillion.
How much of this also has to do with the fact that in many cases women end up working part-time, or they take time out of the career for either child rearing or elder care or something along those lines?
Absolutely. About 1/3 of the overall $2 trillion opportunity is coming from part-time mix. So as you described, women tend to fill more of the part-time roles, about 64% of part-time roles, and only 42% of full-time roles. 30% of that opportunity is from that. 40% of it is from more workforce participation, having women more equally match men's participation, and 1/3 of it is from sector mix. Women tend to be in lower average productivity sectors like services versus manufacturing, which tends to be more male-dominated and higher productivity on average.
Is the answer part regulation, part government intervention? What's the most effective way to generate the type of income equality, if you will, is so that women are on better footing?
Yeah. To capture the $2 trillion, we think the private sector really needs to act and accelerate what it's been doing. The government needs to act and accelerate, and nonprofit sector needs to act and accelerate. And not only act within each of those areas, but increase collaboration across those sectors.
Quaylen, thank you so much. Appreciate it very much. Quaylen Ellengrood with McKinsey & Company. Straight ahead, why high-end home sales are soaring in one southern city. Mortgage rates followed Treasury yields lower today, falling to levels not seen in more than a year. According to Freddie Mac, the average 30-year fixed rate sank to 3.59%. That's down from 3.71% from the week prior. Yields have fallen in reaction to Fed Chair Janet Yellen's remarks last week that the central bank should proceed cautiously in raising interest rates. While mortgage rates are falling during the busiest home selling season of the year, there's also a big shift underway in the luxury housing market. And as Robert Frank reports, high-end home sales are soaring in one southern city in particular.
When it comes to luxury real estate, the big money is shifting to Texas and Florida from New York. A new report found that Austin, Texas had the fastest growth in the country last year when it came to sales of homes priced at $1 million or more. A report by Coldwell Banker showed that Austin's $1 million home sales grew more than 30%. Caldwell saying Austin's recent boom in tech, entertainment, and education is fueling demand for higher-end and higher-priced homes.
Two things I can think of, not being from there, are the sun, like Fort Lauderdale. I've heard a lot of Californians are going there. And again, also the fact that it's a tax-free state.
Fort Lauderdale came in second place, followed by Seattle and Atlanta. But when you look at total volume of sales, New York still dominates, with more than 7,400 sales last year, but smaller growth. LA is number 2. As for the most popular zip code for $1 million home buyers, 90210 is being upstaged by Florida. The top zip was 33160 in North Miami Beach. When it comes to homes sold for over $10 million, Miami Beach's 33139 took the top honors. This year, experts say they expect continued growth in that state, though sales at the very top end of the luxury market could slow down in all the major cities. Demand for high-end housing, of course, will all depend on how much wealth the stock markets and the economy can create in 2016. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Robert Frank.
Tech giant Yahoo has reportedly found a bidder, and that is where we begin tonight's market focus. According to a Bloomberg report, phone carrier Verizon Communications will make a bid as soon as next week for the company's core business and Yahoo Japan. Also, a Yahoo document given to prospective suitors reportedly shows that the company expects revenue to fall nearly 15% this year and also forecasts earnings to drop by more than 20%. So shares of Yahoo fell about 1% to $36.17. Shares of Verizon also down over 2% to $52. Reservations for Tesla's latest car, the Model 3, continue to ramp up. The car maker started taking them last week, and so far the company reported that over 325,000 deposits for pre-orders have been made. CEO Elon Musk said that amount translates to about $14 billion in future sales. However, the strong demand has some analysts concerned about the company being able to produce so many vehicles. So shares fell 3% today to finish out at $257.20. ConAgra, which makes packaged foods, saw its shares rise today after the maker of Slim Jim snacks posted earnings and revenue well above analyst targets. The company recently sold off its private label business and plans on spinning off its frozen potato segment later this year. Shares rose more than 1% to $46.11. Sales at Costco rose 3% in March, helped by strong demand in the U.S. and Canada. However, shares of Costco fell after the company reported comparable store sales rose 1%, which missed analyst estimates. Shares of Costco down 3% to $152.03. It has been 6 months since the Justice Department announced it would be allocating more than $23 million to police departments across the country. That money is to be invested in cameras that will be attached to officers' uniforms. As more departments roll out the new technology, it's raising a lot of questions, but also becoming a big business. Andrea Day has that story.
Turn off the car and see your hands.
You're watching footage captured by an officer's body cam.
Put your hands on your back, Douglas.
Split-second decisions caught on tape. Nationwide, these tiny cameras becoming a staple with law enforcement.
There's always two sides, to the story, and then there's the truth.
With the push of a button, the most reliable witness.
The camera doesn't lie, so.
Officer Eric Rodriguez patrols this New Jersey community, where just weeks ago they rolled out a pilot body cam program.
Do you think you'll do anything differently because you're wearing a camera?
Honestly, of course.
The debate, a hot button, even in the race for the White House.
It can solve a lot of problems for the police. It can also solve a lot of problems, period, where they're accused of things.
We should make sure every police department in the country has body cameras.
According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, in 2013, police cameras were worn by at least some officers in 32% of departments, with more coming on board every year.
I think it's a huge piece of conversation in policing across the country. You see what's happened in places from Staten Island to Ferguson to Baltimore, and people would like to think that body cameras might have changed some of the policing activities. I don't know if that's necessarily true or not true, but ultimately that's where the conversation's going.
Mayor Stephen Fulop of Jersey City in New Jersey pushed through the initiative in his city.
We think that this will be a good thing for the police officers as much as it's a good thing for the public.
But Fulop believes for the new technology to be a success, new guidelines will be necessary.
The policing interest, the city's interest, and of course the transparency interest.
In Rialto, California, Chief Tony Farrar was ahead of the curve, implementing body cams 4 years ago.
It was really more to evaluate the impact that the cameras would have on law enforcement.
Almost immediately, he says, there was an 80% drop in complaints and a 60% drop in use of force. With the federal push for body cameras come millions in government contracts. One manufacturer, Taser, says fourth quarter 2015 sales of body-worn cameras jumped to more than 44 million. That's up nearly 82% from the year before. Back in New Jersey, Officer Rodriguez says cameras act as a reinforcement of what every good cop should already know.
You have to do everything the way you're taught, the way you're trained to do. So
totally by the book.
By the book.
And some of the issues lawmakers are now facing. How quickly will this footage be made public? That's being challenged in courts across the country right now. Police departments are also working to adjust to the new technology, including what parts of an officer's day should be captured on tape, where to store all the footage, and how long to keep it. I'm Andrea Day for Nightly Business Report.
finally tonight, the Masters. It's one of the most well-known golf tournaments worldwide, where players go to win the coveted green jacket and where companies go to be seen. Dominic Chu reports on the big names and the big money in Augusta, Georgia.
The worlds of sports and business regularly collide, and it happens in a very big way each spring at the Masters. All week, golf patrons and corporate leaders gather to mix and mingle with each other in the hopes of enjoying a great tournament and perhaps ink some business deals in the process.
It's very distinctive. It has many values that are shared, common values between Rolex and the Masters. The tradition, the beauty, the elegance.
It's no secret that the game and business of golf has faced some headwinds in recent years, as fewer golfers have hit the links, and there are a number of reasons why.
What you have to have is accessibility and affordability. It's an expensive game, and if there's some way to scale the product, the golf balls, all that cost-wise, I think that would be an attractive thing.
There is arguably no greater and more prestigious golf event on earth than the Masters, and that's why corporate sponsors are looking to associate themselves with this tournament in the hopes of networking with their clients to promote their own brand.
We would do events around the world. Take World Cup soccer, take the Olympics, Wimbledon. But in my view, nothing touches the specialness of Augusta. And the Masters does something this week which makes its brand just completely different to any other golf tournament, any other event in my view.
Golf takes an even more global stage this year as it becomes a summer Olympic sport yet again, and there's the U.S. versus Europe Ryder Cup competition this fall as well. Now, the big question is to what degree global companies will seize on the opportunities. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Dominic Chu, Augusta, Georgia.
To read more about the big money behind the Masters, head to our website at NBR.com. And before we go, here's another look at the kind of rough day on Wall Street today. The Dow, which had been down more than 200 points this afternoon, lost 174 to 17,541. The Nasdaq fell 72. The S&P 500 declined 24. And that is Nightly Business Report for tonight. I'm Sue Herrera. Thanks for joining us. Have a great evening, everybody, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.